Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Hey, good morning, Crosspoint. Really good to be with you today. You know, it's hard to imagine, but today actually marks 1 full year since COVID-19 started wreaking havoc in the US, where we all went into quarantine and we shifted nearly all of our Crosspoint programming online. And when we let it soak in that it's been an entire year, we're confronted with a reality that is both somber and unexpected. There's just no way around it. This has been a very difficult and challenging season for a countless number of reasons. And there have been plenty of moments, and will continue to be plenty of moments, when we grieve and let ourselves feel all the feelings associated with that. However, what I want to make sure we do today is not simply skip over all the good that has happened as well. Because here's the thing, Crosspoint. I am so incredibly grateful for you and what we've been able to do together over this past year. I can't imagine going through this past year and all that it has held without you. I have so much gratefulness for our staff team, our board, our volunteers, and the entire Crosspoint community, all of you who completely pivoted how we did everything as a church within a matter of days and then embraced and committed to those changes. You didn't run, you didn't shrink, you didn't complain. You leaned in and demonstrated your commitment to both who we are and what we do together. We had staff who changed job descriptions overnight, who had to learn entire new sets of skills and technology, volunteers and musicians and artists who had to learn new ways of playing and recording music. We had to discover new ways to gather and stay connected. And frankly, we were really unsure of what would happen financially, not just as an organization, but the levels of financial crisis that would hit individuals and families in our church and the community, and how we could help. And for years, we've said that Crosspoint isn't about a building or merely gathering together for an hour on Sunday mornings, but it's a community of people committed to the ways of Christ, to one another, and to loving and serving others shockingly well. And Crosspoint, I am so incredibly proud to be a part of this community of people who did not let fear crush us, but instead determined that this is a season to lean in. And because of your trust and your generosity, we didn't miss a single payment on any bill this year. And we were able to meet all the financial obligations we had as an organization, when there are so many organizations and so many churches who weren't able to say that. You stepped up. But much more than that, because of your financial contributions, we were able to reallocate resources and show up for people in ways that I could not have ever imagined a year ago. Just in the past year, together we've provided and distributed nearly 10,000 grocery meals to local Triangle families in need. 10,000. We've been able to give away $50,000 toward initiatives to love and support frontline workers, teachers, the homeless, and students in our city and area. Just in the past year, we've been able to give another $100,000 away to pay people's rent, medical bills, insurance, car payments, and utilities. We've been able, as a community, to pay over 300 separate bills for individuals and families across the triangle impacted by COVID that kept a roof over their head, their heat and power on, and food on their table. We've had volunteers consistently keep up with the garden that we built on campus, where as a result, we've been able to harvest and donate over 1,000 cucumbers, sweet peppers, eggplants, and squash from the garden, plus a ton of potatoes and garlic and herbs, and distribute fresh food through our local partners at the White Oak Food Pantry to families in need. We were able to take thousands of more dollars, and we bought essential supplies for students at NC Central who couldn't go home during the early days of the pandemic, and make sure that they had food and toiletries and cleaning supplies. We were able to do the same for men who had recently just been released from prison and had no other place to go through our partnership with Jubilee Home in Durham. We were able to underwrite days' worth of meals with a partner in downtown Raleigh, Place at the Table, that provided free, fresh, and healthy meals for those struggling with homelessness. And together, we were able to provide nearly 600 gifts for 55 local families in need at Christmas, so that every member of every household had at least 3 gifts that they had requested personally. They were able to open those on Christmas morning. Crosspoint. None of that was in the plans a year ago. None of it. And look at what we've done together. I mean, come on. That's amazing. And it is so good. So good. And that doesn't even get into all the racial equity training we leaned into together, the justice advocacy, the counseling, the mentoring, the challenging cultural conversations we held safe spaces for, the deep wrestlings with faith and the scriptures and what it looks like to follow Christ and reflect that kind of love in our culture today. Crosspoint, I could not be prouder to be associated with all of you. Yes, this year has had its challenges and gut-wrenching heartbreak. There's no doubt about that, but I am so incredibly grateful for how we've all responded and stepped into this moment together, stepped into loving and serving and believing that we could do more good together than we could simply do on our own as individuals. And I want you to know we're still committed to leaning in and showing up and loving shockingly well. Now, with the current mandates and restrictions here in North Carolina, wisdom still tells us it's not best yet to gather in large groups as a whole community right now. But we're still extremely committed to who we are, the voice we have, and what we can do together. So here's to keep leaning in and stepping into whatever this next year brings and doing it together and bringing more goodness and love into the world wherever we go, wherever we speak. And as a way to help us honor this very odd 1-year anniversary, we thought we'd revisit one of the very first musical collaborations that we created to kick off Easter last year, because the message and call to live life courageously still rings true. Enjoy Crosspoint.
One, two, three.
Talking all over town. voice of an angel breathing a lesson unheard. Hope with a gentle persuasion whispers a comforting word. Wait till the darkness is over. Wait till the tempest is done. Hope for the sunshine tomorrow after the shower is gone. After the shower is gone. Whispering hope, how welcome thy voice, making my heart in sorrow rejoice. Whispering hope, how welcome thy voice, making my heart in sorrow rejoice. If in the dusk of the twilight dim be the region afar, will not the deepening darkness brighten the glimmering star? Then when the night is upon us, why should the heart sink away? When the dark midnight is over, watch for the breaking of day. Watch for the breaking of day. Whispering hope, how welcome thy voice, making my heart in its sorrow rejoice. Whispering hope, how welcome thy voice, making my heart in its sorrow rejoice. An anchor so steadfast rends the dark veil for the soul. Whither the master has entered, robbing the grave of its gold. Come then, oh come, glad fruition, come to my sad weary heart. Come, oh thou blessed hope of glory, never, oh never depart. Never, oh never depart. Whispering hope, how welcome thy voice, making my heart in its sorrow rejoice. Whispering hope, how welcome thy voice, making my heart in its sorrow rejoice. Making my heart in its sorrow rejoice.
Good morning, Crosspoint. So glad you could join us. It's been an indescribable year. One of challenges and heartbreak, but also one where we have seen amazing things happen that we didn't even know were possible. I'm so incredibly proud of our community, and while I miss seeing your faces, I'm thankful that we can still be loving others and serving together in creative ways. Something coming up is a new initiative with Growing Together Community Garden. If you've never walked behind our church building, you may not know that a group of volunteers has an incredible garden that provides year-round produce for a local food pantry. Growing Together Community Garden has learned that food insecurity in Wake County has increased 38% since COVID hit. In an effort to be a part of the solution, they have joined with a national initiative called Plant a Row, and they've invited us to participate. The idea of Plant a Row is pretty simple. Plant a small garden or add a little to your existing garden and donate it to share with those in need. You do not need to be an expert gardener to do this. In fact, novices are encouraged. The volunteers with Growing Together are excited to teach and share their garden experience with anyone involved. In an effort to make sure anyone can participate, they partnered with Logan's Garden Shop, where individuals can obtain free starter kits. Your role is simply to plant, water, and harvest what you grow. Then bring the harvest to the church at the designated times, and we're going to take it from there. For more information, go to crosspoint.org/plantarow or email garden@crosspoint.org. A part of Crosspoint's mission is to love and care for others in our community well. We have volunteers who serve on various care teams, praying for individuals, sending encouraging notes, providing meals, mowing lawns, and providing rides to medical appointments for members of our community when life hits hard. One essential element of being able to care for others well is knowing that they need care. This is where you come in. We need you to let us know when someone needs care. Before I go any further, I want to stress that the leadership of Crosspointe Church places a high value on confidentiality, and anything submitted in this form is not shared with your permission, without your permission or the permission of the person needing care. When you submit this form, a staff member reviews it and will follow up with you or the person needing care to create a plan. Oftentimes, the care team volunteers do not even know why an individual needs care. They just show up to help with a smile because they want to be a part of the solution. This morning, I want to show you how to find the care form on our website so you can be a part of helping us care for others. First, you'll go to crosspoint.org and click on the menu bar. About halfway down, select Care. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll see a button, I have a need for care. When you click on that button, it will bring up a form to fill out. Fill it out to the best of your ability, making sure to include contact information. Click Submit and someone will get in touch with you. Thank you in advance for helping us care for you and others well. If you have questions about our care teams or this process, email care@crosspoint.org. Another way to participate in what we are doing locally and globally is to contribute financially to Crosspoint. The reason we've been able to accomplish together what we've done this past year is because of those who give to our mission week in and week out. You can do this by going to crosspoint.org/contribute or text crosspointenc to 77977, and a link will be sent to your phone where you can select how you'd like to contribute. Again, I can't say it enough. At the 1-year mark, we miss seeing your faces. We miss hugging your necks and watching your children grow. But we are so thankful for you and the fact that you journey with us as a faith community. We hope you have an incredible week.
Good morning, Crosspoint. You know, when you first open a children's Bible, you see the creation stories. There's pictures of sky and water and plants and animals and God saying things like, creation is good. And then you turn the page and see that the story takes a bit of a turn. There's snakes appearing in trees, Adam and Eve are eating apples and hiding behind bushes and are clearly upset. Well, the narrative for the story of the humans comes from the Hebrew Bible, from what we would call the Old Testament, from the book of Genesis chapter 3. And it reads a little something like this. I'm sure you've heard it before. There's two humans, referred to as man, or Adam, or Ish, and woman, Isha. So there's Ish and Isha, sometimes translated as husband and wife, who lived, although they don't realize it, in an oasis paradise, referred to as Eden. It was a perfect garden, and everything within its walls was in harmony with one another, with creation, with the Creator, between humans, between animals. The man and the woman were innocent. and unaware of anything outside of the garden. And they didn't really need to be aware of anything else, because within that place, everything they needed was provided for them. They didn't have to stress about their physical needs because food and drink and shelter were provided. And presumably the garden was temperate, and humanity didn't feel shame because Eden was a bit of a nudist colony. They didn't want to or need to wear clothing. They were as innocent and pure as young children. God had given them everything. But there was one thing that was off limits. The tree that was planted smack in the middle of the garden. God told the humans, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." It's quite ominous. And reading it now, it sounds a little to me like that experiment that's done to children. You know, the one where the adult puts a marshmallow or candy in front of the child or children, and they're told, don't touch it until the adult gets back. And the adult walks away with the promise to come back after just a few minutes. And then the children struggle with whether to listen to and obey those instructions, or if they should touch the candy or the marshmallow or eat it. And, you know, there's different reactions according to different kids. Some of the kids sit on their hands, others walk around really stressed. Some stare at the candy and they lick their lips. Others smell it. Some touch it or rearrange it. Others take one look at the back of their adult walking away and pop that candy into their mouths as soon as that adult's gone. And this is kind of what I think of when I hear this tree in the middle of the garden with beautiful fruit, and humans are told, don't touch it. There will be severe consequences. Well, adults in these experiments record how children react because they expect them to struggle with the decision of what to do with this candy and this marshmallow. It's a little bit like reverse psychology. You know, if I wanted my child to eat the broccoli, instead of telling them to eat it, you tell them how much you don't want them to eat it. Don't eat the broccoli. I would hate it if you ate that broccoli. In fact, you probably are incapable of eating that broccoli anyway. Don't worry about it. And many kids will simply eat the broccoli because the curiosity is too much. But I can't help but think maybe there's a bit of reverse psychology going on here in the garden with this tree in the middle and the commandment not to touch. Well, back to the man and the woman in the garden. At first, the humans in the garden seemed oblivious to this tree. They are content in their ignorance. They didn't know what they didn't know. But one day, somebody stops by for a visit, the serpent. And now for some of you right now, just me mentioning a snake makes you want to pick up your feet and shudder or grab a broom and run for higher ground. And this is the part of the story where we think we hear that ominous music change, you know, to indicate that danger is near. But put all of those feelings aside, because that tone and that language is nowhere in this story. There is no evidence that the woman is leery of, afraid of, or really even surprised by the presence of a talking serpent. It seems instead as if they probably had previous conversations, and that in this garden, humans and animals have relationships without fear, without animosity, and that it's quite normal for them to carry on conversations. And in fact, for many readers outside of a Western context, particularly readers or listeners with those with a Near Eastern context of literature, snakes, dragons, serpents, they're viewed as good signs. These creatures were not signs of evil to come, but they were givers of wisdom or youth or health. They weren't to be feared, they were to be revered. And there are instances in the Bible where the snake is talked about negatively. There's also other parts of the Bible where they are referred to positively. And there's no language, as much as we want to put it in here, to indicate that the snake is actually the devil or Satan in disguise. It simply isn't there. This is an idea that was added to the story much later. So if you take all of that into account, all of that context, the serpent isn't seen instantly as the bad guy that we think about him, but rather he's thought of as the wisdom bringer. He's the eye opener in the story. The serpent offers information. He offers an alternative perspective to the woman and the man. And the serpent does it by introducing a question. The serpent simply asks the woman, "What did God tell you?" And actually, the serpent's using the plural here for you. He's including the man in the question. What did God tell you, plural? The man seems to be a part of this conversation too. What did God tell you about this tree? So the woman tells the serpent, "We can't touch the tree or eat from it, or we will die." And then the serpent introduces a different perspective on the tree. He introduces a little bit of doubt. The serpent says, "Really? That's really what God told you? There are, in fact, details that have been left out. In fact, the reason God doesn't want you to eat of that fruit is because when you do, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when you eat it, you're going to become like God. You're going to know things. The implication being that you will know more than you know now. And it's here in this story, in the 3rd chapter of our Bible, that humanity, possibly for the first time, is faced with a real decision. The serpent has introduced choice. Now, if you were raised in a church context like I was, like mine, then this story was told as a part of when humans, particularly a woman, introduced evil and sin into the world. That this is something called original sin. This is the original sin of humanity, and because of it, humanity would be born sinful forever. But I want to be really clear that this idea of original sin, of sin at all, isn't anywhere in this text. The word sin is not used or implied. The language here in context doesn't even imply that God is disgusted with humanity or ashamed of it. This concept of original sin in this story came much later with a very influential theologian you might have heard of named Augustine or Augustine. Now, he was doing his best to understand Scripture and human desire and evil and human sexuality, and he has suggested this idea of original sin of being the cause of it. But before Augustine was here, before he had this idea, what was widely believed that what happened in this story is that mortality was introduced to humanity, and that what's inherited afterward is humanity's mortality. However, it was Augustine's ideas and those who came after him and followed in his teaching that shaped our Christian understanding of the story more than the actual text itself. In Judaism, where this text originated, there actually is no concept of original sin. There is instead this idea of humans being more neutral when they're born, with a yetzer tov, an inclination for good, and a yetzer hara, an inclination for bad. And humans are born with an inclination for both. So this is a Jewish understanding. And part of being human is choosing which inclination you will kind of give into when you're faced with a choice. And it seems, for the first time in the garden, humanity is face to face with their inclinations. A decision had to be made. The serpent had introduced an idea that had planted itself in the mind of the woman and the man, and they couldn't stop thinking about it. It replayed, and they walked by the tree and they saw it, and it was just constantly in their vision, and no matter how much they sat on their hands and paced and licked their lips, they couldn't stop thinking about it. And the story tells us that the woman looked at the tree almost as if for the first time, and she realized, number one, that the fruit could be eaten. It wasn't poisonous, and it might actually be good in a fruit salad. And second, that the fruit was desirable for sechel, for understanding, for gaining wisdom and knowledge. And so she made the choice to eat it. And then she shared some with her man, who wasn't kicking and screaming about it. And the scripture tells us that their eyes were opened. The serpent had been telling the truth. And it seems that neither God nor the serpent had given the humans all the facts. clearly the fruit hadn't killed humanity as originally claimed. And clearly there were unspoken consequences that the serpent just failed to mention to the man and the woman. So what was going on here? And there's a multitude of things that happened after the humans had their snack. The first one was that they had a new perspective on who they were and where they fit into creation and garden life. They understood things differently. And this poses a question. Why didn't God want humans to have knowledge? Did God know that they would, like the kids with the marshmallow, eventually eat it? They would give in and eat from the tree? Was that the plan all along? What is so distinct and godlike in obtaining knowledge? What's going on? So one thing is certain. Eating of the fruit meant gaining knowledge, and that changed perspective, and that in turn required more choice. So God re-enters the story a few verses later, and the first thing he does is confirm with the woman and the man what had happened. Humans had made a choice, and there were consequences. And the text here is always plural. Woman and man made the decision. It's important to note there's no shame or condemnation language in this text. But the choice that the humans made did have consequences, and it required this reconfiguration of creation. And that's what God did. With the gaining of knowledge, humanity's innocence had been taken away. And therefore, the relationships and the understandings between things also changed. No longer would humanity be able to live peacefully and simply and innocently in the garden. Instead, God tells them what life is like, that it's full of toil. And the word here is literally hardship, hard work, and sorrow. Life could no longer be like life in the garden without effort. It would require a lot more work, and it would include pain. Also something that did not exist inside the innocence of the garden. God didn't take away the original responsibility of humanity to care for the earth and its creatures. They'd been given that responsibility when they were created. It just wouldn't be as simple outside of the garden. And what comes to humanity then is this understanding that there is a tension between the way things are and the way things ought to be. Things ought to be in harmony with one another. However, the woman and the man now understand that things are not in harmony, and therefore humanity will constantly be fighting to get things where they ought to be. And God gives humans this checklist kind of all the ways that life will be difficult and hard and painful. And the man and woman are almost like little children learning at this moment that that cute little colorful bee also has a stinger. And that the cool water of the creek can also be slippery and knock you down. And that your best friend can also be the one to break your heart. And I do want to stop for just a moment and acknowledge that this passage has been used throughout many cultures and throughout history as a way to justify all kinds of abuses against women. And I want us to understand that there is nothing in the original language here that suggests that women should be in servitude to men. These are meanings from cultural context applied later on. And although there is curse language for the earth, there is no curse language in God's description of conception, in childbirth, or in the responsibility of humans to care for the earth. Instead, where this has been used to say that man is above women or should govern over women, what we find when we have a better translations from the original languages would be, rather than man shall rule over you, man shall rule alongside or with. And instead, what we need to look at here is this language of pain and desire, a desire for things to be made right between humans, between God and humans, between humans and creation. And there will always be a desire for these things in human life and between God and humans. But it will require hard work in order to restore and achieve it. And it's also important to remember that although pain and toil are introduced in this story, so is identity. The woman, before she acquires knowledge, has no name. She is simply called woman or wife until after she eats the fruit and acquires knowledge. After the humans eat the fruit, the man sees the woman differently and names her Eve, whose best meaning that we can figure is something like life woman or mother of life, meaning that although pain and hardship has entered human understanding, it doesn't mean that life stops. Life will go on. What we also see here is that instead of abandonment or disgust of humans by God or anger, we find that God introduces death willingly into the garden for man and woman. God uses skin from animals in order to sew protective clothing for humanity as they're evicted from the garden together, leaving paradise and going into the desert. And this really seems to be the biggest consequences of humanity's choice. The man and the woman are kicked out and banned from the innocent protection of paradise. God even puts celestial guards with this flaming sword at the gate in order to keep them from returning. Humans are forced from the oasis of Eden into the harshness of the desert. And the differences between these two places are vast. This is the first exile. Man and woman become displaced people. Why did they have to leave Eden? To quote the great Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. Or in this case, with great knowledge comes great responsibility. Because once you know, you cannot unknow. You cannot regain naivety. You can't retreat back into ignorance. And so in order in choosing to eat that fruit to gain knowledge, humans were given responsibility to do something with what they now knew. They could no longer be passive bystanders, but they were required to act upon the knowledge they had gained by eating the fruit. They had to be active in moving things from the way they were to the way they ought to be. And there was absolutely no incentive to act unless they left the garden. Japanese-American Old Testament scholar Frank Yamada asks this beautiful question: when is a desert a garden? And when does a garden orchard become a prison? Well, one could argue that if Adam and Eve didn't leave the garden, it would have eventually become like a prison for them because they could not escape the knowledge they now had. And when we do not act upon the knowledge that we have been given, we become prisoners of our own inaction. And what does this ancient story mean for us? What is the implication for us, other than the cute images in our children's Bibles? I think we have to ask ourselves, quite simply, what are the things that we know? Where do we have knowledge that we did not have before? And where are we no longer ignorant? And where does knowing call us into action of some sort? Are we being called out of the innocence and the ignorance of our own Edens? Where do we have a duty, a responsibility to act? I think about this most easily in my mind kind of as these concentric circles of knowledge and action. And our inner circle is knowledge we learn about ourselves, things we know about ourselves. And as we mature and grow, we often learn things about ourselves that we know need action on some part. They need to grow, they need to change, we need to do inner work. And we've talked about this quite a bit with this Heart Knower series we've been doing. Steve and Jonathan have talked about these very specifically the past few weeks. Examples from that might be, what are our responses to anger? When we know we're not responding properly, what is our action to change that? What is our response to our own ingratitude, to our own sense of entitlement, to the way we treat others or our relationships with others, the way we view ourselves? Maybe it's the readiness to acknowledge our addictions or our need to work on our mental or emotional health. These are the fruits of our personal knowings. And when we gain knowledge of ourselves, we're faced with a choice. We dig in and do nothing, or we choose action. And, as in the garden, leaving the garden, action often involves personal toil. It often involves hard work, and sometimes it involves pain. But this is one circle of knowledge, one circle of responsibility, knowing about ourselves and what actions we need to take now that we have that knowledge. And a second circle of knowing, I think about moving from knowing knowledge inside of ourselves to knowledge outside of ourselves. What have our eyes been open to in the worlds around us that might require action or change on our part? You know, closer to home, thinking through, is there someone within our circle who needs a text or a phone call that we've had on our mind and we know they're in need of that? Is there a student who needs some extra time and grace? Are there people in our life who need to be called out because of the way they speak about people and people that they don't understand or who are unlike them, and we've been silent about it for too long? Are there gaps and needs within our community that we could fill? And when we recognize these things, it doesn't instantly mean that we go on the attack to fix them or we have to take instant action, but it does mean that we have the responsibility to contemplate the best course of action to be taken. And then we have the responsibility to follow through. We cannot just sit and think about it. We must do. And then looking outward even more, what are the injustices within our communities? The different ways that adults and students maybe are treated because of their skin color, their gender, their identity, their socioeconomic status. Where are the discrepancies and lack of public housing in our area? The disparities within the education and opportunities we find within our prison systems? In who has a voice at your place of employment or education or recreation or in your neighborhood? Some of the biggest injustices we have all been made aware of this past year are the racial injustices that still exist within our country. And we can no longer claim innocence and ignorance to this anymore. These are things that we cannot pretend to be blind to because we are out of excuses. We have no reason to not know them. We can no longer claim the protection of Eden because we've eaten that fruit. And we are responsible to help move things from the way that they are and have been to the way that they ought to be. And I don't mean that all of us have to don a cape immediately and try to change the world in one big swoop. But for some of us, maybe that is what it means. Maybe that means instead that we give up more of our time to work towards justice and restoration, or to focus on something within us that needs our attention. But sometimes action also means something minute. The change of a tone, or a habit, or of language, the educations of ourselves. Conversations with others, inclusion of others. Sometimes it means a vote. Sometimes it means peacefully marching. Sometimes it means a change in how we live our lives. It also means understanding that everyone may not know and change at our same rate, but that for all of us, it does mean that when we know, because we know, we cannot sit in Eden any longer. We must look at the influences we have and the responsibility we have and act within our circles of influence, no matter how small we think our influence might be. For all of us, change doesn't happen quickly, nor should we lose heart when it does or doesn't move quickly. And remember the promise of toil and hard work. This is what comes with action. But when we do not act upon what we know, when we recognize injustices or something in ourselves that needs to be changed, and then we do nothing, when we try to remain in Eden, we will eventually find that our Eden becomes our prison, because we are not meant to stay in Eden, as comfy as it is. Ignorance is bliss. But we are meant to take our knowledge and act upon it, to be changers from what is to what ought to be. And also remembering and hope that we are not left alone to do it. Think of all the things that we have done this past year in the midst of hardship and turmoil. We've talked about this through the service. We have to remember that we have a God who has personally clothed us and then sent us out. Imagine the things we can do looking forward to 2021 throughout this next year when we remember that. And as we end today, I want to offer us some time for simple reflection. Sometimes what we simply need is some time to think And it seems like maybe even in the midst of a pandemic, and we've had all the time in the world, we've had no time in the world either because we've been with people for so long. But I want to offer you some time to reflect today, to contemplate what it is you actually know before you can do anything with that knowledge. So I want to offer us a few moments of reflection, a time to be still and to think. And if you can't do that right now, maybe your life's a little crazy and kids are running around or the dogs are barking, take some time later to do that. Go on a walk or find a quiet place to sit. But I invite you, if you are able, to be still, to close your eyes, and to reflect. Take a few moments to be still, to reflect inward. What are things you know or new things that you've learned about yourself? Are there areas in yourself where you need to take action? Take a few moments to reflect outward. Where are your personal areas of influence? Home, community, country, world? What are things you know or new things you've learned about these areas? What is your responsibility and ability to act? Think about both seemingly small and big actions. And what is one thing you can do today? Prayer from Psalm 139 as we go. You have searched us, Lord, and you know us. You know when we sit and when we rise. You perceive our thoughts from afar. You discern our going out and our lying down. You are familiar with all our ways. Search us, God, and know our hearts. Test us and know our anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in us, and lead us to the way everlasting.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.